We can't render you sorry, so drone strike. Thank you, and should you try and leave before it happens, we have placed assets at each exit. You will be intercepted. You will be neutralized. Death to terrorism!
Our next speaker will be known to many of us, Lee Rhiannon, who's a New South Wales Green Senator Elect. Lee.
I do acknowledge the traditional land of the owners on which we meet and pay tribute to their history, their culture, and their ongoing contribution to our communities. Julian Assange is an Australian. That makes me, and I'm sure it makes you, feel very proud. But we certainly cannot feel proud of our government. Right now, the government, like we are, should be celebrating the fantastic contribution of Wikileaks. Right now, representatives from the British Embassy should be down there ensuring that Julian's rights are being respected and that in no way is under threat from all the terrible attempts to make out that he is a terrorist and even worse. But what do we have? We have some of the worst sycophantic behaviour from this government that we have seen in decades. Now, we've seen this over the years from successive coalition and Labor governments, doing whatever the US administration wants. But right now, Prime Minister Julia Gillard and Attorney General McClellan have really gone too far. Ms Gillard, shame, absolute shame. Ms Gillard has said the WikiLeaks activities are illegal, but she can't tell us what the laws are that they have broken. Mr McClellan, as the Attorney General, has promised the US administration that Australia will assist in investigating WikiLeaks. And on November the 29th, he stated that the Defence Task Force set up to monitor WikiLeaks will be transferred into a whole-of-government task force. Now, what does that mean? It doesn't sound good. It sounds pretty sinister. And if the Prime Minister had any decency, she would scrap that today. Speaking in Canberra today, Green Senator Bob Brown has called on the government to guarantee Julian Assange's passport, and that if he does choose to come back to Australia, that he can do so free of persecution and prosecution. Before I leave the Prime Minister, I think it's worth us just reflecting on the fact that she's really big on talking about sharing information through My School, My Hospital. But when it comes to my government, she runs a mile. The Greens stand here in defence of free speech and honesty in government. WikiLeaks has really put the pressure on. We need to grab this opportunity and to be demanding consistency, integrity and honesty in all aspects of government, both public and private. The bar has been set high and we need to ensure that that is how all governments operate. We need to seize this opportunity. I would just like to give a couple of examples from how important this WikiLeaks material is, how it can make a difference to the lives of people, particularly in low-income countries, and I believe save lives. There was a cable sent by the US ambassador in Sri Lanka on the 15th of January. This is Patricia Butananis, and she's referring to war crimes committed in Sri Lanka. I'll just read out the words. She says, in Sri Lanka, responsibility for many of the alleged crimes rests with the country's senior civilian and military leadership, including President Rajapaksa and his brothers and the opposition candidate. Now, that statement right now is putting pressure on government leaders, particularly Western government leaders around the world, to back a war crimes tribunal. And that is what is needed. And again, if the Prime Minister of this country wanted to start restoring her integrity, she should get behind it. War crimes were committed against the Tamil community, hundreds killed and injured, suffering continuing to this day, and the War Crimes Tribunal must be established. I also wanted to make reference to one of the points made by Matt. He talked about the cables coming from Shell, about how they had infiltrated with their own staff into the government of Nigeria. Now, back in the mid-1990s at a much smaller rally, people gathered here to remember Ken Saro-Wiwa and a number of Nigerians who were hung for standing up against Shell. Shell operates in the Niger Delta, and the people of that area have suffered enormously because of Shell. And let's remember, they make their profits every year in billions of dollars. Meanwhile, 70% of Nigerians live below the poverty line. Absolute shame. Absolute shame. And how I wish that we had Wikileaks in the 1990s, because I'm not saying Shell was involved, but there were certainly some interesting articles, and to have had Wikileaks then may have well changed the lives and have helped save Ken Saro-Wiwa and his colleagues who were hung at that time. So the final word needs to go to the courage of the Wikileaks, from Julian, his workers, the volunteers, but also let's give a special mention to the whistleblowers, those who have courage to release the material. They've got the courage, we need to act. Clearly, the world needs Wikileaks. Thank you.
Just one point further on what Lee said. We should not forget that in 2009, when Sri Lanka was committing its worst crimes against the Tamils, one of the few countries in the Western world that did not condemn it was Australia. We should not forget that. The next speaker is Simon Frew from the Pirate Party.